welcome to Crosspoint. If we haven't had a chance to meet, I'm Eric, and we're so excited that you're joining us today as we continue our series, Spark, Ideas That Ignite. In a world that is at the same time more connected than ever, somehow we're more disconnected than ever. We want to explore that, what it looks like to spark connections that matter. And speaking of connecting, we're so thrilled that you are connecting with us today from wherever you happen to be. We would love to hear from you. You can scan the QR code and it will take you to our digital connection card. You can use that to share prayer requests, ask questions, or let us know how we can help you take that next step wherever you may be going through this week. If you're filling it out for the very first time, include your mailing address. We'll drop a gift in the mail as our way of saying thank you for joining us this week at Crosspoint. Now, there's some really cool things happening here at Crosspoint this summer. Here are the top 3 for you to know this upcoming week. First, next weekend, our Spark series will continue with our incredible guest speaker, Scott McDonald. Scott is a favorite reoccurring guest around here, and you're not going to want to miss what he has to share with us next weekend about a new way to understand the role of conviction in our lives. So make plans to join us online or in person next weekend here at Crosspoint. Second, we want to help you throw the best party on your block this summer. You can pick a movie, invite neighbors, and we'll set you up with a backyard movie night kit with super simple instructions on everything you need to know to have a great backyard movie party. Just scan the QR code or sign up online, and we'll set you up with everything that you need. Last but not least, summer is flying by, and kids don't want to hear this before you know it. It's going to be back to school time. But families, we've got some exciting things for you to look forward to as we celebrate Move Up Weekend coming up August 3rd through 6th. Not only will kids be promoted to new environments that weekend, but we've got some fun in store for all ages. On Friday, August 4th, it's Carpool Cinema. We'll be back in the Crosspoint parking lot with the new Super Mario Brothers movie. On Sunday, August 6th, there's going to be a party in the parking lot. We're just having all sorts of fun in the parking lot. Games, food, and fun for all ages. None of these things would be possible without the work of amazing volunteers that make things happen week in and week out here at Crosspoint. If you're already part of one of those teams, thank you so much. If you want to be a part of helping make these and other awesome experiences possible for our community, now is a great time to join a team. And there are so many ways in which you can get involved, some of which you'll hear about later in our service today. Which, let me tell you, we've got a great service for you today. So to get us moving in that direction, Ashley and the Crosspoint Band have a great song from Martin Garrix featuring Bono and The Edge from U2. This is We Are the People.
Well, welcome again to Crosspoint. My name is Abbie. If we've not met, I'm so excited that you are here with us. Whether you're joining us here in the venue tonight or on the line, part of our online audience, let's give it up for those of us who are joining us that way. Yeah. And I am so pumped to get to be here and to continue this Spark series tonight because, I don't know if you have caught the last 3 weeks, but they have been fire. So if you have missed them, be sure, go back and check out where we've been, like I said, over these last few weeks. And today, as Eric already mentioned a little bit, we are going to explore an idea that I hope will help to connect the dots in some areas of your life where you may feel a disconnect. And one of those areas that we're going to talk about quite a bit is, much like in the clip that we just saw, the disconnection that we may experience in relationships with people who are not the same age as us, people of a different generation. And, as people in general, though we are more alike than we are different, there are some real distinctions between different generations, ways that we have been formed differently in the way that we approach and see the world. And sometimes those differences can lead us to a disconnect in relationships, in our ability to understand one another. Let me give you an example from my life recently. A couple of weeks ago, I took my oldest, he's 5, on a floating trip down the White River for the first time. Has anyone experienced the magic that is like tubing or floating down the White River? Just me. You should try it. Yeah, okay, yeah, somebody. It is so fun. We had a blast. This was him and his little buddies, and it was just so much fun. But on the way home, as we were driving afterwards, I asked him, buddy, what was your favorite part of our float? And he said, oh, the rabbits. I was like, what? I don't remember seeing rabbits. Where did you see rabbits? And he said, the bumpy rabbits that we rode over. You realize what I realized. Oh, the rapids. And he paused for a minute and said, yeah, Mom, that's what I just said, the rabbits. And we went back and forth a few more times before I finally gave up and realized there was no amount of convincing that I could do to convince this kid that rabbits and rapids were a different word. And, for now, I'm totally content with allowing there to remain a disconnect between what he thinks and what he will someday realize, because it's pretty adorable to hear him tell people about riding the rapids. But, there are other times in our lives that we've all experienced when disconnection has some more serious implications. Maybe you have walked through this recently in your own family or in your workplace or in other relationships in your life. And so today, I want to encourage you and to remind us that fighting for connection matters. Another area in our lives where we may often experience a disconnect, where many do at least, especially people who are of younger generations, is with what to do with the ancient text that we call the Bible. See, for many, there is a disconnect when it comes to the Bible and some of the antiquated instructions that are in it that can be a major barrier that keeps us from faith. For others of us, maybe it's not that much of a barrier, but maybe what we've experienced is that there is a gap between how we value the Bible. If someone were to ask us, oh, is that important to you? We'd say, oh, of course. But there's this gap between how we value it and our actual relationship to it, whether or not we really read it on a regular basis and take direction from it. And most likely, if we find ourselves in this place, it's because we just aren't really sure how. We don't know what to do with it or what it is. I remember in middle school when I first started to feel this tension. See, I had grown up always being told that the Bible was clear and it was the answer book that I needed, and I could turn to it to guide me. But what I found as I started to read it for myself for the first time, I found that so little of it made any sense to me. You ever been there? Sometimes when I was feeling really desperate for it to mean something, I would play this game where I'd be like, okay, God, I'm just going to flip to a random page, and I know that you are going to speak to me through what I read. And so I'd get ready, and I'd open it up, I'd point to the page where I found, and I'd read something like, And you shall also make a curtain of goat's hair and for the tent over the tabernacle. The length of each curtain should be 30 cubits long and 10 cubits wide, and yada, yada, yada. Great. Very, very helpful. You know, maybe you've heard things said before like I had, that the Bible's a roadmap for life, or the Bible is the answer to all of life's questions, or you've seen someone with a shirt with this acronym, basic instructions before leaving Earth. I just have to say, I have a really hard time believing that this guy actually owns this shirt, but who am I to make assumptions? Maybe he does. You know, the problem with phrases like this, besides the fact that they are painfully corny, is that they aren't actually true. They set us up to be disappointed when we read the Bible for ourselves and discover that it's not always crystal clear, that it doesn't give us this obvious map with all of the answers that we need for our lives. Now, before you start squirming in your seat, before you get suspicious or think I'm dogging on the Bible too much, let me tell you, I have spent the better part of my adult life studying it. Not only did I get a whole degree in biblical studies, I was crazy enough to go back and pursue another one, spend more years and more money, because here is what I have found. The Bible is not as simple as I once wished it was. But what we have actually been given is far more beautiful. And it is worthy of a lifetime of leaning in to discover more. It is a library of writings written by real people in particular times and places across hundreds of years in a variety of genres that tell through diverse voices and perspectives the story of God and God's relationship with humanity throughout history. And through these writings, we really can come to know the God who created us, who loves us, and who is inviting us to join the still unfolding story of what God is doing in the world to bring restoration and wholeness, much like Kyle talked about last week. The Bible is true in the deepest sense of that word. And it's also layered and complex and tricky and wild, and often there is more to the story than what we can see from our point of view. We're going to look at a couple examples of that in just a minute, but before we do, I just have to say, I am so grateful that Crosspoint is a place where we can be honest about this tension, because the truth is the next generation and the world in general need us to be honest about this. The next generation and the world around us in general need us to approach the Bible as a conversation starter instead of a conversation ender. I know so many people that have walked away from faith thinking that Scripture couldn't sustain the weight of their questions, when maybe all they really needed was a community of people who gave them permission to wrestle, who actually encouraged it, and who celebrated that there is more to learn, especially when we lean in to the hardest questions. If you're sitting here and you are thinking, I just don't know what I think about the Bible, I find it offensive, or I find it antiquated. If you have questions that you aren't sure you're actually allowed to ask out loud in a church, I want you to know that this is a place where you can be honest and unafraid about that. We don't believe that God is overwhelmed by your questions, and we aren't either. Now, speaking of antiquated and disconnected from our lives, let's look at a couple of passages that I'm willing to bet you've never heard talked about in church before. Or if you have, I'm pretty sure you haven't heard them talked about in this way. And these are passages that I think actually have the power to spark some important ideas for us. The first is this commandment from the book of Leviticus. It says, "Do not cut your bodies for the dead or put tattoo marks on yourself. I am the Lord." Now, if you've ever heard someone claim that the Bible forbids tattoos, this is what they're pointing to. This is what they're talking about. It's a verse that has caused a lot of debate over time. Some say the Bible clearly says no tattoos. It's right there. Others argue this is a law that no longer applies to us today. But there's actually another option of how we can look at this, a way that we can learn from the intention behind this ancient law. And we're going to get there in just a minute. The other passage that we're going to look at today is actually an instruction from Paul that he wrote in his first letter to the church in Corinth. And if you've been around Crosspoint any amount of time, you know that we really love Paul around here. We think he's pretty awesome. We're big fans. If you don't know, Paul was a leader in the early church who sparked so much change. He really pushed the envelope to say, let's not get too caught up in the way that things have always been, because Jesus has come to make it possible for us to live into a new way of love, a new way of being a community where everyone is on equal ground. And so you would think, based on what we know about Paul and what he was about, that this one would be easier for us to deal with than that tattoo law. But actually, what Paul says here is even more confusing and honestly offensive. And so typically what we do is we just ignore it. We skip right over it. And it's this instruction that he gives to the women in Corinth about wearing head coverings. It's this whole deal, but basically what he's saying is, men, when you pray and prophesy, don't wear anything on your head. Women, when you pray and prophesy, here's what it says in verse 5. But every woman who prays and prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. It is the same as having her head shaved. These two passages, don't get tattoos, women cover your heads. These are prime examples of that disconnect with the Bible that we were just talking about. But stay with me. Because when we learn a little bit more about what is underneath these weird ancient commands, we discover a spark that I believe has the power to ignite something in our lives today. You know, in every culture across history, there are physical markers that tell us something about a person's identity. For example, in our world today, the color of a person's passport tells you something important about who they are. It tells you where they're from. Or when you see someone wearing a Patriots jersey, you automatically know they are a person that cannot be trusted. Or one more, when you see a gaggle of haircuts just like this walking your way, you know that you are approaching a group of teenage boys. You know, these physical markers, they exist in every world, and the ancient world was no different. And in order for us to understand the law against tattoos in Leviticus, we need to know that in the world at that time, there were many ways that a person could become a slave. And one of the most common ways that a person found themselves enslaved was economic desperation, as a last resort to pay back debts. We also need to understand that most of the time, slavery in the ancient world was not a permanent status. Once the debt was paid, the person would, in theory at least, be released from their enslavement. This was long before the racialized version of slavery that we are most familiar with. And so since anyone could be a slave, there was a need for societies to figure out how are we going to distinguish who is a slave and who is free. And one common solution was to brand or tattoo slaves as a way of marking their status. This is the problem with tattoos for the author of Leviticus. See, the Levitical laws were designed to create a society governed by God's vision for the world. And an irreversible mark that permanently limited a person's freedom did not align with God's intent. In our world, a tattoo is a form of self-expression, but in their world, a tattoo was a symbol of bondage. And that is the reason why the author of Leviticus said, no, that is not going to fly with us. Fast forward hundreds of years to first century Corinth, there are some things that Paul and those who first read his letter would have understood that we need to understand too. See, Corinth was known for being kind of a wild place. It was like the Las Vegas of the ancient world. And there was this mount that loomed over Corinth from wherever you were in the city. You could see this mountain. And on top of that mountain was the home of the temple of Aphrodite. Aphrodite was the Roman goddess of beauty, seduction, and pleasure. And prostitutes of that temple were the main attraction in ancient Corinth. Travelers would come from all over to worship Aphrodite through sacred prostitution. And there were two ways when you arrived in Corinth that you would know if a woman was one of those prostitutes. Number one, she would be wearing a certain kind of sandal. And number two, her head would be shaved. Now imagine that you are a part of the early church in Corinth, that you have heard the story of Jesus and decided, I'm all in with that. Imagine that the story of your past included enslavement at the temple of Aphrodite, that you once wore those sandals and had your head shaved and were the object of that worship of seduction. Now imagine, as that kind of person, what it would be like to show up in a community of people with very different stories. See, Corinth was also a really wealthy city. And so you would have been looking around the table at other women with long, flowing hair, which was a sign of wealth and status. Would you have the courage to show up with a sign of shame so obvious as the missing hair from your head? I think this is the key to understanding why Paul would care about whether or not people wore head coverings when they got together. That Paul instructed the Corinthian women to cover their heads so that the differences between the women who had a past that they were trying to leave behind and the others who had a more reputable past was not quite so obvious. Maybe Paul was thinking of those in their community who had found themselves on the outside, and he was advocating for the church to be the kind of community that made space for all people to come. What if his instruction was designed to encourage connection? What if this piece of 1 Corinthians 11 is actually connected to the rest of the letter, in which Paul repeatedly calls out divisions and encourages unity? We see it very early in the letter of 1 Corinthians. He says, "Now I appeal to you, brothers and sisters, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you be in agreement, that there be no divisions among you, that you be united in the same mind and same purpose." Then a little later, just following the head covering instructions in chapter 11, he says, I'm getting the picture that when you meet together, it brings out the worst of you instead of the best. First, I get this report of your divisiveness, competing and criticizing each other. I'm reluctant to believe it, but there it is. He goes on. He speaks to them about being unified as they come to the table together. And then he reminds them of how they are all connected by describing the church as the body of Christ. He says, the way God designed our very bodies is a model for understanding our lives together. Every part dependent upon every other part. The parts we mention and the parts we don't. The parts we see and the parts we don't. If one part hurts, every part is involved in the hurt and in the healing. If one part flourishes, every other part enters into the exuberant. You collectively are Christ's body. That's who you are. You must never forget this. Only as you accept your part of that body does your part mean anything at all. See, as we dig deeper into both of these instructions, we discover how context paves the way for connection. When we recognize that there is more to the story than what we are seeing on the surface, it sparks the potential for a connection that would otherwise be out of reach. And that's not just true with these biblical texts. This is true for every relationship in our lives. Every point of disconnection, every person we meet, there is always more to the story than what we can see. And it matters that we remember that, especially in the midst of disagreements and disconnection. Another theme I hope you notice in the heart behind both of these commands is that both of them are aimed at protecting vulnerable people. Both the tattoos and the head coverings required the people of God, urged the people of God to do something different than what everyone else around them was doing so that people who had nowhere else to belong could find a safe place to land. There are so many ways that we can apply this principle today. But I want to suggest one to you. That in our world, right here in our community, one of the ways that we can live this out is by forging connections with young people. Our kids are facing challenges unlike any generation before them. In a world that is in some ways more connected than ever, they are desperately longing for the kind of connection that they actually need, and it's harder to come by than ever. Our country has recently declared the mental health crisis among young people in the United States to the state of a national emergency. And there's an organization called Springtide Research Institute. They're one of the best, I think, out there for getting a pulse on what is going on with our young people, what they're experiencing. They recently released a finding that reflects the urgency of that national emergency. And it's a finding, it's a report that I think needs our attention. They found in data collected at the 2-year mark of the pandemic, so this is kind of summing up 2022, nearly half of young people reported being moderately or extremely depressed. Over half of our young people say that they are moderately or extremely anxious or stressed. 45% reported being moderately or extremely lonely. And this one hurts. 61% agreed with the statement, the adults in my life don't know how much I'm struggling with my mental health. There is so much that needs to be done in response. And there's one way that we can all be a part of the solution. See, research also tells us again and again how long-term connections with caring adults can be a game changer on so many fronts. Young people who have significant connections with adults beyond their immediate family are more likely to be able to navigate the impact of anxiety, more likely to be able to break the cycle of poverty, more likely to develop a lifelong, thriving faith, more likely to demonstrate a higher level of resilience, just to name a few. Many say that the magic number is 5. Every young person needs 5 adults beyond their parents and primary caregivers that they can go to when they aren't sure who else to trust, who they know care about them, are walking with them, are in their corner. And so because of this, there's 2 really practical next steps that I want to encourage you to consider this week. The first is this: find your 5. Parents, caregivers in the room, this is about thinking intentionally and strategically about the people who are in our kids' lives. Do your kids have 5 trusted adults that they can go to? Do you know who they are? And if not, who are you going to invite to step into their lives? Where can you show up to place them in proximity with the kind of people that you want to influence them? Students in the room, this is not just about you, this is for you. I want to ask you the question too. Do you have 5 adults outside of your family that you can go to, that you trust? And if not, you can be a part of your own rescue. You can be intentional about connecting yourself and seeking those kinds of relationships. This is a key reason why CSM, Crosspoint Student Ministries, and Crosspoint Kids Environments exist, because we want to help you get connected with people who are going to be your cheerleaders and supporters, because here's the truth: no matter how old you are, we are better when we don't try to do life alone. We need each other. The second really practical step that I want to encourage you to take today is to consider becoming a change maker for someone else. See, just like the vulnerable people in the ancient world needed advocates to rise up for them, advocates like Paul, advocates like the writer of Leviticus, who would come alongside and help make sure that they had opportunities to experience freedom and new life, there are so many people in our world, our time, our community, who need other people to show up as advocates for them. And our young people, kids and students in our community, are one of those groups. For those of you who would say you are a part of the church, that you're a follower of Jesus, this is central to who we are meant to be. Like Paul explained, we make up the body of Christ on earth, and it is our mission to play our part. Teresa of Avila famously once described it like this: Christ has no body now on earth but yours, no hands but yours, no feet but yours. Yours are the eyes through which Christ looks out with compassion to the world. Yours are the feet with which he is to go about doing good. Yours are the hands with which he is to bless others now. You know, one thing I don't think we think about very often is that the church as an organization is uniquely positioned to impact young people in a way that I'm not sure any other organization in our community can do in the same way. Where else do you find organic opportunities for long-term, cross-generational relationships to happen? Now, don't get me wrong, teachers, coaches, educators, counselors, they do irreplaceable work influencing the next generation. But for the most part, all of those other systems are built for short-term connection. When the season is over, when the school year ends, often so do those points of contact. And so we have a unique opportunity built into just who we are, the fact that you can be a part of this community for your whole life. Showing up to make a difference in the lives of young people is not just something that we have to do, it's something that we get to do. And you know, the statistics don't tell the whole story about this generation. They don't talk about how amazing they are, how they have so much to teach us. They don't tell us how this generation is wise and empathetic and oriented toward justice in ways that I'm not sure any generation before them has been. Just ask one of the incredible leaders who are already serving and investing with Crosspoint kids and students. In fact, we did that this week. We sat down with one phenomenal leader to share more about her experience. Check this out.
My name's Emily Hutcherson. I started coming to Crosspoint 10 years ago, and then I started with CSM 7 years ago. I'm not gonna lie, I was very nervous at first, but I was like, they're not gonna know what I don't know. You know, they're not going to judge me, and I'm not going to judge them. So something I love about being a CSM leader is having the opportunity to just be there for the kids and being that safe space for them, but also just watching them grow in their faith is so fun and so just exciting. I mean, you have kids that come in that are like, I don't know what I'm thinking. I don't know how I'm gonna do this. And then a year later, it's like they're teaching you things you didn't know about the Bible or whatever. And it's really cool to watch their faith grow. At the end of every small group, we do prayer requests. And everyone, you know, one at a time, prayer requests. It can be anything they want, you know, nothing is wrong. We pray, and then I check in with them weekly. Like, hey, I keep that piece of paper with me all week. These are our prayers for the week, and I say, hey, how did this go? Or what came out of this? Or, and it takes 2 seconds to send a text, and we have a group chat, and we just keep connected always. We do stuff outside of CSM. We go to lunch, we go to dinner, we go to movies, and so it's just, I don't know, they're fun. They need that outlet. They need someone outside to be able to trust and depend on. And I love being that person for them. And they're that for me too. They're very supportive.
Huge thank you to Emily for sharing her story. She actually filmed that with us after spending the better part of the day serving alongside some of our students earlier this week with one of our missions partners, Cafe. And, Emily is just one of so many phenomenal leaders around here who have leaned in to connect with the next generation among us and are making such an incredible impact. I'm so grateful for them. I'm so grateful for the team that I get to work alongside. I'm so grateful for the people that hold my baby who, I didn't mean to get emotional about that make my son excited to come to church on Sundays. But here's the truth. The need and the opportunity to grow our influence with kids and students who are already a part of this community, and to create space for other young people to find the kind of connection that could be a game changer in their life, right now is greater than our current capacity. The need and the opportunity outweighs what we can do. We need more of you to say, I'm in. I'm going to give some of my time, some of my energy to connect with the next generation because I believe that they are worth it. And maybe you've thought about this before, but you haven't said yes, you haven't stepped up because you just don't feel like you have the time. And trust me, I get that. The reality is our teams are made up of people whose lives are really full. They don't have the time, but they have made the time because they understand the value. Or maybe you're sitting here and you're like, you know what? What's holding me back is I'm afraid that I just wouldn't know how to connect, that I wouldn't know what to say or do with a preschooler or with a student. First of all, I promise you, you will not be in it alone. And you are already more prepared than you think. Let me tell you about my friend, Charlie. I've spent now over a decade working in student ministry, and in that time, I have had the opportunity to meet some amazing leaders. But Charlie was a person who was on a whole different level. Never have I met someone with a greater reach of influence among young people. He could literally connect with any kind of person. When I first met Charlie, I was 22, and he had been volunteering with middle schoolers for as long as I had been alive. And when Charlie passed away a few years ago, literally hundreds of stories poured in. So many people showed up to give witness to the way that Charlie had made an impact in their lives. He had this way of making every person he encountered feel seen and loved. And he did it by being unapologetically authentic. He didn't worry about being relevant. In fact, he would regularly say things that were so off the wall that made no sense to people that were younger than him. Probably honestly made no sense to people who were his exact same age. But it didn't matter that we couldn't always connect with what he said because Charlie made it abundantly clear how much he cared. He taught me so much about what kids need more than anything are adults who will show up consistently for them and just offer them unconditional love. Now, I'm not asking you to make a 22-plus year commitment. Don't worry. I'm simply asking if you might consider giving it a try. Couple of opportunities. This August, our student ministry is going to be kicking off the school year with a 4-week back-to-school event that's so much fun. It's called The Chase, starting August 13th here on Sunday nights. And I wonder if some of you might consider making just a 4-week commitment to help make that an incredible experience for every student who walks through our doors. Or maybe others of you are ready to check out what it would look like to be a part of one of our kids' environments on a Sunday morning through a First Serve. There are so many ways that you can get involved with kids, so many ages, so many options that will work with your schedule. And so we want to give you the opportunity before we leave this room and get back to all of the things that we have going on in our lives and forget all about this, to make that decision right now. And maybe not even make the decision, but just to say, you know what, I'm curious about this. I would like to know more about this. There's a couple of ways that you can do that. Number one, you can use this QR code, and you can fill out a digital volunteer form through that. But if you're more of a paper person, we want to make it easier for you. We actually have a couple of tables here in the front and also out in the lobby where we've got some physical cards with some opportunities where you can say, you know what, I want to jump in with the next generation, or I want to know more about what that might look like for me. So I want to encourage you to as we go through this last song, as the band leads us through one more incredible song, to consider what would it look like for you to be a change maker for someone else. Let's stand as we get ready to sing this, and let me pray for you as we do. God, I thank you that you are a personal God, that you are a God who knows us and loves us and wants to connect with us. God, you see the things that we have brought in to this place. God, you also see the emotions that some of what we've talked about tonight may stir up for us. You know the concern that we have for kids that we love. You know the uncertainty that we feel about how to be what they need. God, would you help us to trust that you care for them more than we ever could? That you are guiding them and working in ways that we cannot yet see. Would you bring the right people around us, bring the right people into their lives who can echo the truth that we are longing for them to hear? And God, would you help us to be the right person for someone else? Would you open our eyes to the opportunities right in front of us, where we can lean in, where we can be an advocate, where we can say, yes, I want to do my part to make a difference, to be a change maker. Thank you, God, for all that you're doing and for this meaningful purpose that you invite us to be a part of. Amen.
Could we live like your grace stronger? Go and put your hands together. That all our fails and failures. Could we live like your love is deeper than our hearts could fathom? Could we live
Hey, thanks so much for joining us again here at Crosspoint. For all of you who already helped fuel life change by giving your time on our volunteer team or giving financially through the Joy Box, I hope you're walking away today feeling very encouraged that what you do each and every week here at Crosspoint matters immensely. Thank you for doing what you do to help change somebody else's world. And if you're ready to jump on board, we're so excited that you're ready to take that step. You're not going to regret it. Be sure to hit submit on those digital connection cards and volunteer cards. And if you'd like someone to pray with you today, simply text the keyword "need prayer" to 317-834-7373, and our prayer team will be in touch with you to pray with you today. Have a great week, and we can't wait to see you next weekend.